Welcome back to the Chase MedSearch podcast. Most of us think we understand risk. We plan our territories, we manage our pipelines, we book a family vacation, and assume the rules will be familiar, even abroad. My guest today learned painfully that assumption can be wrong. Ryan Watson is a medical device sales representative, an American, a husband, and a father whose life was turned upside down when he was detained and jailed in Turks and Caicos for having 4 rounds of ammunition in his bag while returning home from a family vacation. What followed was fear, powerlessness, international headlines, and a confrontation with systems most of us think we'll never face. Ryan has since written an account of that experience, a story not just about prison, but about identity, faith, resilience, and what really matters when everything familiar is stripped away. This conversation isn't just about travel or injustice, it's about perspective, how we respond when control disappears, and what that teaches us about leadership, pressure, and life. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jordan.
It's great to have you on. Been enjoying dipping into your book and reading it. Very compelling, and I've told you you're an excellent writer. But tell us, before this incident all happened, who was Ryan Watson? What did a normal week in medical device sales look like? Family, travel, routines? Set the timeline for us, if you would.
Yeah, no, I would have liked to have thought of myself as a pretty simple guy, living a pretty simple life here in Oklahoma. Um, we live on a little bit of land. I grew up on a ranch and rodeoed my entire life. I prayed feverishly that my kids would follow in those same dreams and pursuits, but they had nothing of the interest. So, we a lot of football practices, baseball practices, cheerleading practices. We're running to and from. My wife teaches fifth grade at a private Christian school just down the road from us. But yeah, myself, I've been in the neuromodulation space for 15 years now. And I manage a market here in Oklahoma City that I've managed since 2019. It's a sizable market. We do a lot of volume. Oklahoma City is a very, very large pain market. So we stay hooked up. We stay extremely busy. Just kind of a family that kept our nose down and lived a quiet, simple life. So
What drew you into medical sales in the device industry in the first place?
funny question. I think if I'm being brutally honest, right, I've been on a quest to be more honest with myself and with others as of late. Honestly, it was the income potential. It was what initially drew me to it. If I'm being blatantly honest, I hope others would possibly admit that as well. Prior to getting in devices, I did sales and marketing for Red Bull.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not an easy transition to make. There's a gentleman who remains a close friend and mentor by the name of Dan Freilich, who was hiring for an apprenticeship role at St. Jude Medical. I met none of the qualifications, but my resume, I actually had a resume that I made into a magazine of all of the different sales and marketing applications that I had carried out up to that point in my career. And Freilich called me and he said, "Man, I just got to meet you and hear some of your stories." He's like, I really, you have no business in this role. So I got an interview and one conversation led to the next. And next thing you know, he says, "Ryan, I'm going to go against my judgment here. I want you around. I want to just run a little experiment here and see how you do in this space. So I'm going to give you an opportunity, but know that you're on a short leash." And golly, I went through the sales training program, which was at the time, it was like a 4-week boot camp. We're, stowed away in a little hotel room in Dallas. And at the end of it, I had done really well on my testing and such. And some of the executives had come out and there was a territory that had just been vacated in the West Texas market. They said, "Man, we need to get somebody out there immediately. There's a large population of patients that are going to be abandoned if we don't." And I raised my hand and said, "I'll go. Send me right now." I said, my bags are already packed. And they're like, man, don't you want to go home and see your wife? I was like, I will have a long conversation on the, on the way to West Texas. And so I went out to West Texas and babysat a territory. I had no permission to go call on accounts or do anything. I was just reprogramming patients. And finally I called my boss, who Daniel Balcom at the time. He's now a legend in the space. And I said, hey, buddy, would you allow me the opportunity to just go call on a couple of physicians? Just give me one doctor to go call on. And he's like, dude, don't mess this up. He said, because you'll lose this job faster than you'll secure your role here. So I said, okay. I went to a physician, a very, very large neurosurgeon in San Angelo, Texas. And I was honest with him. I said, man, I don't know much at all about this space except for what I learned in training. I said, you're an avant-garde in this space. You have an opportunity to train a representative in a way that you would feel like you would want a representative to show up and support your cases. And he latched onto that. And, within about, 6 months, we were off and rolling. And within the year, he had become St. Jude Medical's largest implanter. And that is kind of what springboarded my career into medical devices. So.
That's outstanding. So, I mean, you jumped right in, hit the ball. You're a medical device rep in the neuromodulation space, dealing with pain management. You were at St. Jude, and then I think you went to Nevro. Was that the next
Yes,
move in your career?
Yes, sir. In 2019, I
Mhm.
moved up. My boss and predecessor, Luke Perky, had reached out to me and asked me to come backfill his role. They were big shoes to fill, undoubtedly, but yet Oklahoma was home. It's where I grew up. I was always itching to get back to Oklahoma, and Nevro had some level 1 data that I wholeheartedly believed in, and it was something. As a medical device representative, we want to believe in what we're selling. We want to know that we're doing the right thing by patients, and I want to lay my head on a pillow every night knowing that the decisions that I'm out supporting are backed by level 1 evidence. And so that really kind of gave me the inspiration to move to Oklahoma. And it's not always been easy, but it's been a fun road for sure.
That's great. Now, shifting here a little bit, had you ever thought about risk while traveling? Geopolitical risk, safety risk, or was that just sort of routine? Had you done a lot of international trips at that point in your life?
Yeah, I had traveled a good bit. My wife and I, we fell in love with Costa Rica. We've traveled a bit together, but she and I had never really considered any type of risk whenever it came to traveling. Like anybody, we'd watch a show, like Locked Up Abroad or one of these shows, and you get a little bit of anxiety about booking the next trip after watching something like that, but nothing legitimately concerning about any type of travel.
Okay. Take us to the airport. What exactly happened?
Yeah, so I really the story begins on the morning of April 7th when we leave for Turks and Caicos.
Mm-hmm.
We had packed our bags the night before. We were pulling out of the driveway, and we're about halfway down the driveway, and Val kind of has that knee-jerk reaction, and she looks at me. I'm like, oh no, I'm not gonna like this. And she's like, babe, I think my bag's too heavy. It's like, you're fine. We're gonna be okay. I'll pay the overage if it is. She's like, no, please just pull in. Let me grab an extra bag. Not only would that, alleviate the cost of paying an overage, she said, but then it would give us an opportunity to throw some clothes in there in case something happens to our baggage. And she said, I'll just carry that bag on. I can't tell my wife no. She's much more attractive than I am. And so I've learned to just be a good soldier. I put the car in drive and pulled back up to the house. She ran in. She had grabbed a rolling duffel bag that we received as a wedding gift many, many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
She threw it in the car, we took off for the airport. We get to the airport running a little bit behind now, and so we're scrambling. She takes some of the clothing out of her checked baggage and throws them into the carry-on suitcase. We had checked the bag. I know there's a lot of internet warriors out there who've shamed me to the nth degree about not checking the bag. We had checked the bag. The pockets were completely empty. The bag itself was completely empty. So we get to Will Rogers. My wife takes the bag to the x-ray scanner. Nothing's amiss. Nothing is, flagged. And so we get to the island of Turks and Caicos later that afternoon. Skate right past. I mean, they don't check bags there. Nothing gets scanned. In fact, and I even mention it in the book, I stop and I think to myself, like, what in the world? Like, this is the only country I've ever flown into that they don't scan your bags upon entry. And my buddy, who was really insistent that we go to Turks and Caicos, he turns and looks at me. He's like, "It's the Caribbean, Watson. Everybody's carefree here." And so it was like, just chalked it up to that, just island life. And so we embark on our 5-day vacation. It was a vacation planned for my 40th birthday. And 2 fraternity brothers were also turning 40 within a couple weeks of me. And so, us and our wives got together and planned this trip. And so there were 2 other couples that were with us. Like I said, we had a great time. We lived it up. We acted like we didn't have kids for 5 days. And, we had, left all of our responsibilities back at home. And then on April 12th, we go to leave Turks and Caicos. We're going through the airport, which was a madhouse. Something had happened with some previous flights that had been delayed, and the airport itself was just pure and utter chaos. It's a tiny, tiny little airport. But once one flight gets backed up, they all get backed up. And so it was pretty chaotic. We had paid for a expedited service that basically it's somebody that walks you through the front of the security line. And so we had paid for this service to try and save some time. We get to the front of the security line, but now it saved us probably 30 minutes of waiting in line, but we've now ticked off every person that was waiting in line behind us. And so it becomes a pretty big shoving match, and people are pushing their bins in front of ours. And we all get separated, and somehow or another, I end up on the other side of the security line. I pull into a duty-free shop. I was just trying to, escape the chaos. And I'm sitting there looking at watches or cologne or something. And I look through the glass window and I see that Valerie, my wife, is sitting there stuck at the security line. And so I make my way over there and I'm like, "Hey, what's going on?" She's like, "Hey, they're going through the duffel bag." I don't think anything of it. She's got her makeup kit in there. I think, well, she's got some liquid or something. And they go to work on this bag and they start taking it apart, or they start taking items out of it, scanning the bag, empty, scanning the individual items. And then the lady comes over and starts taking the lining out of the bag. I had never noticed, in all the years that we owned the bag, that the lining had zipped out of the bag itself. And she gets to pulling and on the lining, and I'm watching her, and she's jabbing her hands down in between the lining, and next thing you know, I see her eyes light up, and I thought, "What's that?" And she pulls something out and turns around and makes her way back to the other airport agents, and they have a conversation, and she turns around and holds up a small package of ammunition, and I recognize it right away. I hunt with it's a very specific hunting cartridge. It's a 6.5 Creedmoor. But I buy reloaded ammunition. It's a little bit more economical for that particular round. And I noticed the packaging that it came in. And I thought, oh my God, like, how in the world did this get in that bag? Like, none of it made sense. And I'm recounting my brain. I'm like, we carried that through Oklahoma City, right? Like, and I'm looking at Valerie, and Valerie's looking at me like, what in the world is that doing here? We're both just dumbfounded.
Is your first thought, this is This is a mistake? Or are you
Yes.
thinking, I'm in trouble?
No, 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 no. I'm thinking this is a mistake. I've never had this mistake happen before, but you know, growing up hunting my entire life and having kind of a network of friends that hunt, I've had a number of friends that have had this happen to them back in the States. All of them got a finger wag. The ammunition got thrown in the trash, and then they were on about their way. And so I'm in no way overly concerned that this is going to escalate into anything. I'm thinking I'm going to get a stern talking to, and then we're going to be boarding our flight here in about 10 minutes. I apologize emphatically. I'm like, hey, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that was in there. Can we just throw it away? I don't need it. I'm not trying to keep it. And she was like, well, you need to talk to one of the officers. I said, okay. So we wait around at the security line for golly 20 minutes, and it's like we're just watching people come and go, and nobody's really paying any attention to us. And then a guy in plain clothes walks up to me, takes the tickets out of my hand kind of forcefully. That was a little strange. He looks at my ticket and says, hey, I just want you to know you're not making that flight. And that's the first like little instinct that I had. Man, this is not going to be just a stern talking to. I might end up having to pay a fine. We get led out of the airport. Our friends are, concerned, but we're telling them, hey, you've got kids at home. Get on the flight. We're going to be on probably the next flight. Like, we'll make it back soon enough. So we get pulled out of the airport. We get thrown into the back of it. It's a little Nissan silver beat up SUV. There's no police car. We've not seen a police badge. We get thrown in the back of this car and taken to this unmarked location that has this big, it's a white 2-story building that has a sign that says Nexus on the front of it. I'll never forget that sign for some reason. It's like etched into my memory. And Valerie had been sharing our location with the couples that we were with and said, hey, please track us. Like this doesn't seem, it seems a little sketchy at this point. We've not seen any badges. We're in the back of it, this Nissan beat up SUV. And so they send us a screenshot of our location and they say, hey, this looks nothing like a police station. Are you sure you're safe? We're like, no, we're not sure. We're not sure of anything right now. And so we get led upstairs. We walk into an empty office building. We get taken to a little bitty tiny room and placed in this room. All the while, I'm still carrying the bag with the 4 rounds of ammunition in it. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. The 2 officers enter, and they begin interrogating us. And it gets pretty heated pretty quickly. Not heated on my end. I'm yes, sir, and no, no, ma'am, and everybody. And they get to grilling us, and who have you been doing business with? What were your intentions here on the island? And why did you bring ammunition into our country? And I was like, hey, I'm a hunter. I had no intentions of bringing that. And then, they laid in, do you not know our laws? And I was like, why in the world would I research your laws? I was worried about packing flip-flops.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, I kind of stopped their interrogation. I cut them off and I said, hey, we've got kids at home. Like, can I please call my mother? She's watching our children. Let them know that we're going to be late. I don't want anybody to get worried. And that's when the room tilted, is because the officer begins to laugh. He kind of sits back in his chair and, pushes his chest out a little bit and says, you two don't get it. He's like, you're both going to prison for 12 years and that starts today. And the air left the room in a big way.
So he's the officer and the judge, apparently.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And, my wife begins to get hysterical in pleading. We got kids at home. None of this is, having any impact whatsoever. And there's almost this sense of pride that I'm, catching and reflecting off of them, that I'm like, what is going on? Like, this just doesn't make sense. Like 12 years. Initially I'm thinking it's an intimidation tactic, and he doubles down again. He's like, no, we have a minimum mandatory 12-year prison sentence. You're going to prison.
Mm.
And so my wife, catches her breath and asks a question. that, I mean, it still rattles my bones to this day. And she says, you know, neither one of us have been in any type of trouble, nor seen the inside of a jail room. What's it like? Will I be cold? And that question absolutely hit me in the gut, because when we, you know, make a vow to protect our spouse, like,
Yeah.
and you know, to know that you failed on that proportion and that she is now going to be going to prison with me, it was something that I don't know if my feet ever really touched the ground for a number of days afterwards, after hearing that question. But I stood up. Something switched inside of me. I stood up and I said, "Hey, uh, that's not going to happen." And everybody kind of looked at me, and I said, "I can promise you one thing." I said, "A lot might go on here today in this room, but it ain't going to end up with her in prison." And they all kind of looked at each other. The two officers left the room, and my wife was like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "You seriously going to fight these two officers?" I had no idea what I was doing. I was just, you know, it was all emotion at that point.
What was the most shocking thing about being detained as an American abroad in this experience?
Well, I think in this particular experience was, as we continued to learn of our situation, we learned that we weren't being detained um, for a simple oversight. As we gathered more information, we started to learn that there was political motivation as to why we were being detained. That did not seem like real life to me at all. It seemed like somebody had plucked me out of my life and dropped me into a Netflix documentary. It became something that I became severely insecure about whenever we would talk to our friends and family back home about what we were facing, and what steps we were going to have to take in order to try and get home. But yeah, the reality of going to jail or going to prison um, was, you know, that for some reason was easier to accept for me than being able to accept the reason why I was going to jail.
Yeah. What does jail actually feel like? Not the headlines, but just the day to day reality of being behind bars.
It is dark. In my cell, there was no electricity, there's no air, light. So there was a small 10 inch by 10 inch hole cut in the door of the cell that I was in. And so you start to lose your grasp of time. You have no sense of what time it is. Um, then you start to have to ward off the dark places that your mind can go. Whenever you start to consider, like, hey, most of my days are going to be spent in the dark, and time really has no relevance to me at this point. Um, you know, I, it's a cold place. You know, the cell that I was in, um, it was pretty disgusting. You know, there was a lot of Haitian graffiti that was written on the walls in fecal matter.
Mm.
So it was wretched in there. There were cockroaches everywhere. Um, and yeah, you know, it was just not any place I had ever in my life envisioned I would ever end up. So
I imagine the food was not good either. Wasn't it?
no,
What are they
no.
at that point in there? What are you eating?
Um, at one point I was brought some fish stew. I immediately rejected it. I said, please, I can't even, you know, like, the smell is bad enough already in here. Please don't bring that into my cell. I didn't eat much. They
Mhm.
allowed my mother to bring me food one day, which was really strange because nobody told me it was happening. All of a sudden, this guy just shows up at my
Hmm.
cell door with a pizza box. And I'm like, what in the world is this? You know, and bless my mother. She's as sweet as can be, and she's a savior in my eyes. But she bought me like this chorizo pizza with jalapenos and everything else. I was like, Mom, my guts are in a knot right now. I don't know how I'm going to eat this thing. um, but the funniest thing is that when I opened the box, there was a giant bite of the pizza that was taken out of it, and I was like, "What in the world? Somebody eat my pizza?" Like, and I would later find out that the guards would make her take bites of any food that she brought me to
Hmm.
ensure that she wasn't poisoning me on the inside, which I thought was the strangest thing in the world. So they would make her take a bite of my food in front of them. It was strange, but no, I didn't eat any of really. I think they brought me some jerk chicken that I tried to eat once. It had been sitting out for a while.
Did they let you out of your cell to like exercise in the yard? Did you meet other inmates in there? What were they like? Give us a little
No, well,
background.
technically I was only in a cell for 72 hours.
Okay.
And so after 72 hours, I was able to secure bail through what they call as surety. So I had to have a trusted local, put up an asset, the equivalent of my bail. They wouldn't allow me to pay a cash bail
Mm.
because they said I was a flight risk. Um, and so they needed a local to vouch for me and help keep eyes on me. And so I had to put up the title. The first bail I got it was actually the day that Valerie and I were interrogated and arrested. The guy that was our driver actually came and put up the title to his car. So, I mean, bless his heart, he's the sweetest person known to man. I mean, he was just a blessing to us and our family. But yeah, he barely knew us. I mean, we'd shared maybe 5 rides with this guy. We had shared our faith with him. He had shared his with us. And so we knew we had that in common. That was it. He was the only phone number I had of any local. And I said, hey, man, I would never want to ever put you in this position. They're not allowing me to pay a bail. Like they're saying they need this. And he was already on his way. Like I could hear the tire screeching as he was making a U-turn to head to the jail. So we got that first bail through surety on April the 12th. And then I got a second bail through surety on April the 25th. Um, and there was a local that had actually put up the title to his restaurant
Hmm.
that allowed me out through the Supreme Court bail because my Supreme Court bail was much higher than my temporary police bail was. And
Mhm.
so yeah, so I was remanded to the island. Um, I had to run to the jail cell every day and sign a bail book. It was the strangest thing ever. It was a college ruled notebook, and that's how they made sure that I was still on the island. And so, um, you know, it ultimately became I had about a 5 mile round trip to run to the jail and back to sign in to prove that I was still on the island.
So you're out on bail, but you have this 12-year sentence hanging over your head while you're on the
Yes,
island. Because
yeah.
is there going to be a trial, I assume? Is that what you were waiting
Yeah.
on?
Yes, I had to go through their court system. My trial, anything dealing with ammunitions on that country or firearms, has to be through the Supreme Court. And so, so I had to have a hearing through the Supreme Court, which obviously takes time, which is part of the reason that they were lenient to allow me a bail, so that I could continue to secure attorney and defense. However, it's a matter of liability. So did you have the bullets? Yes or no?
That,
Yes, and so the other thing is in order to secure Valerie's release, I had to um, I had to go and give a recorded interrogation that it was my bag and my bullets. It was, you know, it was something, the night of April 12th, I laid awake and I told Valerie, I said, I can't allow you to go to prison. And neither one of us are dishonest people. I said, but we've got to work on the best lie we've ever told right now. And that has to be my bag. And so we laid awake all night long. I practiced being an interrogating officer. Why are your items in that bag? Why aren't your husband's items in that bag? If that was, why were you next to it? We went through all of it. And that was the one lie that we told, was that was my bag, or that I was carrying that bag, when in actuality it was her carrying that bag. But so on April the 15th, I gave that recorded interrogation saying, my bag, my bullets. They kept us both on bail through the 22nd because they were still trying to see if they could figure out a way to make charges stick against Valerie, to put her in prison for 12 years as well. And then on April 22nd is whenever they decided that because of my recorded confession, that they weren't going to be able to have charges stick for her as well. So they allowed her to return home to our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And
So how
yeah.
long was she on the island in total?
So she was detained for 10 days. She never, thanks be to God, she never saw the inside of a jail cell during that time. So she was on bail, had her passport was confiscated, but she never saw the inside of a jail. But she was on island detained for 10 days post vacation. So.
Mm-hmm. So as a sales rep, you're used to having control. You control your territory, you control outcomes. What is it like to have zero control in that situation for you? How did it feel?
There is a moment of panic. There is a moment of disbelief. And then there's this sobering moment. There's a time where you have this sobering moment that said, hey, okay, here's the reality of my situation. I have to start to assess what my options are. But first, before I can even assess what my options are, I gotta fully understand what's levied against me. And so that's when kind of the research phase starts of what is this? What's the purpose of all of this? Before we got on this call, I'd mentioned that, our first obvious divine intervention that took place in the course of this 70 days. And the night that we were arrested, Valerie's father had sent out a prayer request to all of our family in North Fort Worth and said, hey, please pray for Ryan and Valerie. This is what's happened. Her cousin was at a fire station and pulls out his phone and reads the message aloud. There's a gentleman who he'd never met standing behind him and says, you've got to be kidding me. My best friend is a guy named Michael Grimm. Michael Grimm was the first American to get sent to prison for this exact same thing there in Turks and Caicos. Let me put you in touch with him. And he had just gotten home just a few weeks prior. So we reach out to Michael, and Michael becomes a wealth of knowledge for us. He helps us to understand the politics of the island, what's going on in the island. And so we say, we asked him, we're like, is it money? And he said, no, man, I wish I could tell you it was that simple. It's not about money. He said, what happened in August of 23, whenever I was sentenced to prison, the local families here all stood up and celebrated me going to prison. In fact, the newspaper on the island read that American exceptionalism finally ends today. The leadership, whose constituents are truly only the original families. So only the original families can vote. So the leadership, which is ran by a gentleman by the name of Charles Missick. Unfortunately, his family has a very, very long documented history of corruption. And he sees this. He sees what is gaining favor from his constituents. And his response was to go to the appellate court and enforce a 12-year minimum mandatory prison sentence for this infraction to be applied to travelers alike, is what the original drafting of that law read.
This
And so,
I'm going to interrupt real quick,
Yeah.
Ryan. This seems really strange. This island, I assume the vast majority of revenue that it has is from tourism. And I got to believe American tourism forms a significant percentage of that. So,
87% of their GDP is American tourism.
yeah, this seems like economic suicide to enact that. And this guy lives on the island. He's one of the original members of his family as of the island. What could possibly be behind that motivation? That just seems wrongheaded.
Yeah, if there has always been um, this, not always. It starts back in the 1970s, whenever the island is under British rule, and then you start to have American development come onto the island. Um, it's an island that doesn't have any resources, right? Like they import 90% of the food from Florida that they consume there on the island. Um, there really are no exports. So tourism became the hand that fed them quickly, but also the hand that was holding them back, right? So they became sequestered to it. So American developers were coming in and taking up all the land, and they were getting pushed into these interior parts of the island, which really held no intrinsic value, and so it started to breed this resentment towards the British rule and Americans alike. Um, and, in a lot of ways, I can somewhat empathize with some of that resentment. If you study your whole life or you have these aspirations to be X, Y, or Z, and yet 90% of your GDP is American tourism, the likelihood of you serving an American on vacation for your job is pretty high. And so they became a victim of the tourism that was created. And so there was some resentment. If you look at Michael Graham, or if you look at Brian Hagerich, who was from Pennsylvania, both arrests happened prior to mine. And then there's actually about 5 other Americans that were arrested prior to them, all basically just extorted, for lack of a better term. There was a long history of those Americans that have been arrested, none of which you could find on the internet. They did a really good job of suppressing this. And so as we're having this conversation with Michael, and I'm saying, hey, what are my options here? Is it paying somebody off? I hope, I'll do it right now.
Sure.
I will get home. I'll start selling some stimulators. We'll get back to work. We'll pay this off. He was like, no, buddy, you're a political pawn now. And, really your only option is to flee. And do you have it in you to get on a boat tonight? And my wife broke down in tears. I said, no, that's not an option. And I said, well, what about the embassy? Will the embassy help you? And he said, Ryan, I hate to tell you this, but no. He said, go the other direction. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I'm going to send you an email that was sent to my family from Usha Pitts, who was the chargé d'affaires of the embassy. It was a very nasty email to his family, to his mother, saying, lose my email. Your son is of no interest to me. And so I was, once again, I'm running out of options, right? Like you said, I'm learning that I have no play. I have no control over this situation. And about that time, my wife's, what's that?
How do you survive mentally in that? What is holding you personally together at this
Faith.
point? Okay. Talk about that.
I had an overwhelming sense that God was working ahead of me in all of it. And I had some bit of calm whenever I would stop and, go into prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I just, there was something pulling on my heart that said, hey, take a breath. Like, God's got this. You're here for a reason. And you start to wonder, well, is that reason for me to go share the gospel with somebody in jail or in prison? And is that the reason I'm here? And if so, I'm going to have to get to a point where I can accept that. But I just felt like God was working something else out. And while we're having that conversation with Michael, I said, what about the media? And he's like, don't do it, man. He said, they're going to kill you. He said, I
Mm.
promise you they'll kill you in prison. He said, there were multiple attempts at my life. I was the only American on inside. To them, that meant one thing, is that I had money.
Mhm.
They used desperation against you. You had no contact except for one 5-minute phone call a month to your family, which is made by the prison cell phones. And once you dial up your family, they have their number in their call log, and they will extort your family for any type of money that they can get to try and keep you alive. And so he said, do not go to the media. I can promise you, you'll get killed. They're going to protect their tourism. And so, he's telling me this. I'm like, golly, like, of course they would, of course they're going to have that type of reaction. But about that time, Valerie's phone dings, and it was a girl named Melody Mendez. And Melody is married to one of my childhood friends from Shawnee, Oklahoma. She had become the head anchor of NBC Boston. And she said, hey, Ryan and Valerie, I just want you to know I'm praying for you. I know this is all top secret right now because we were trying to keep everything from our kids. She said, but if there's anything I can do, please let me know. If I can share your story, I will. And that's when we turned to Michael and we said, hey, I think media is the way. I felt like God caused that message to be sent when it was. And I said, this is our way off the island. And he said, man, that's a bold move, but you need to consult with Brian Hagerich. Brian Hagerich was from Pennsylvania. He was arrested in February, just 6 weeks prior to us. He said that move is going to put his life in jeopardy just as much as it is yours. So we contacted Brian. We brought him in, and we had a sit down. And I said, man, I think this is what we need to do. I think this is our way off this island.
Mm-hmm.
He said, no way, man. He said, I've been told that I'd get killed for doing it. He said, we're not doing it. And that's when I put my sales hat on, and I tried every trick in the book. I did every effective questioning model you could think of. And I have to say, I have to give credit where credit's due. It was Valerie that ended up selling him on the idea. And she said, Brian, let me ask you for a second. She said, if we are looking for the world to respond, do you think the world is going to respond in a bigger way if they know that I'm here on the island with you guys as well? Or two American fathers, right? Like two white guys, just average Joes. Like, how much care is that going to drive from the general population versus a private school Christian, private Christian school teacher? And he stopped and he thought about it, and he said, you know what, you're right. More sympathy. And he looked at me and he said, are you willing to risk this? Like, are you willing to put your wife's life in jeopardy? And I had thought about it, and I had actually just done some research and was reading up on what an embargo was and how to enforce an embargo. And I said, no, I'm not. But what we can do is we can pre-record all these interviews. We can force ABC, NBC, CBS all to sign embargoes that they won't release the story until Valerie's on a plane. And that's what the plan was, and from that point on, it was, how do we run the biggest marketing campaign ever known to man? How do we cause something to go viral? And how do we put enough economic pressure on this island that they reconsider what they're doing? And so we put our hands in the middle of a coffee table. We all prayed on it. And then we got to work. The next day we started recording interviews and contacting media outlets. And, we had to do so very, very systematically, though, just so that it wouldn't leak without them honoring the embargo or agreeing to the embargo. So it was a lot of 6 degrees of separation. Who do we know that knows somebody else? And because at the entire time, not only did we need velocity with the story and we needed it all to pop all at one time, but we needed to protect our kids who thought that we were just stuck on an island because a storm had blown in. And so,
Mm. And it certainly did pick up. I mean, ABC, CBS, NBC affiliates. I think some of your Facebook posts had over 10,000 comments on them, were shared hundreds of times. It became a big media story in 2024.
yes,
So
sir.
your plan worked
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of noise. Did you end up getting threats because of it?
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
There, you know, it was, people started, there were a lot of threats towards me. A lot of people commenting that, I deserved the death sentence, and a lot of people following up in those comments saying that they would carry it out. Then pictures of my house started circulating. People started circulating our address. I did my best to stay out of any type of social media. Like, I never posted anything, but I would forward things to other friend. We had a network that we had established of any type of person with any type of influence. Uh, Joke that it was like a Rube Goldberg machine where it was like I text this person that text this person, and so um but yeah, I wasn't aware that it was going on to that degree. I was tipped off whenever my friends showed up at my house. I could see on my Ring doorbell camera, they showed up at my house and started installing gates and started installing other additional security. Friends from our church group would show up, and we're staying the night with Val and the kids. And I was like, something's going on, but they were doing their best to keep me from all of the details because they knew I was, they knew I had a million other fires that I was fighting at the time. But yeah, it had blown up. Whenever I got out on Supreme Court bail, so whenever I was out of jail, that very next morning I woke up to an email. It was an old colleague of mine from my days at Red Bull, who was big into PR, and she was running metrics on the story. And I'd actually reached out to her to help Valerie and my mom kind of keep tabs on everything while I was in jail. And she sent me a metric, or sent me an email that had some metrics included. She said, "Ryan, you did it, buddy. Like, now it's time to carry on and figure what else you're going to do next." In that email, there was a metric in there. In the first 72 hours, the story had generated 2.9 billion media impressions. Whenever you looked at every media outlet that had picked it up, every magazine, every social, they I don't know how they run those metrics, but 2.9 billion media impressions in 72 hours. And so it was on at that point.
You might be in the wrong business as a medical rep. You might have made it in PR, you know?
I think I have like one of those in me, and that I don't know if I could do that again.
While you were out on bail and awaiting trial and sentencing and all of this, I heard you spent 72 hours in jail and then you're out. Where are you staying while you're out? Is that a safe location? And did it turn unsafe once this story hit the media? I mean, what about you personally and your safety during that
Yeah,
time?
so we were in an Airbnb initially. Whenever I went to jail, we came back. We were in the same Airbnb, but things had gotten pretty sketchy. Brian Hagerich was on another part of the island. We moved him in with us because he was getting threats as well. We were public enemy number one. I mean, on the islands, or number one and two. My wife instituted a hard and fast rule. She was like, no cowboy hats. She sent me a box of different baseball caps that I could wear around the island to switch them up because I was becoming recognized constantly. The physical threats didn't, I mean, it didn't start until May 9th. Early May 6th, it kind of hit its peak. Someone started calling in bomb threats to the Howard Hamilton Airport there at Turks and Caicos. Actually, ended up calling in 17 bomb threats in a matter of like 10 days.
Mm.
Every time they mentioned my name and Brian Hangrich's name, um, which then the local media started saying that we were orchestrating all these bomb threats. Then on WhatsApp, which is how most of the island communicated, on WhatsApp, there were hits put out on us. And unfortunately for me, I had to go check into jail every day. So I had a 2.5 mile run there and a 2.5 mile run back. And I was running to jail on May the 9th, I believe it was. And I'm cutting down the path that I had taken every time. And all of a sudden I see a flash of something on, my right periphery. And I jump to my left, and next thing you know, something grabs my heel, spins me around. I land. I'm scuffed up. It didn't, nothing hurt. It happened all so quick, and I think shock was already setting in. And I turned and looked, and it was a car that had tried to jump the curb to hit me, and it was sitting in the middle of the road at this point. Luckily, the curb was high enough and it was a little 4-door sedan.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, I'm scrambling to my feet, and they throw the car in reverse. And I tried to scale a fence. The fence collapsed underneath me. I realized, man, that's not going to work. So I turned to fight. I was like, this is, I guess, my only option. And I turned to fight. And next thing you know, they put the car back in, and they took off. And I kind of sat there for a minute and looking at myself and my scrapes and my bruises. And I'm like, I'm alive. Like, I'm okay. Like, that didn't hurt, but did that really just happen? In fact, there's a reason that I don't have my right AirPod in, is because my right AirPod got damaged during that time. So it crackles now, and I can't hear anything out of the right AirPod. So, but yeah, I threw my AirPod in, ran as fast as I could to the jail. And of course, nobody believed me or cared about, that. But at that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to be smarter about this. One, I can't run with AirPods in anymore because I got to hear oncoming traffic. And two, I've got to change my routes up every day. And so I would try to get creative, change up my times a day that I ran. And yeah, it got sketchy.
Did the police attitude change toward you at all once this story hit and made national news
Yes.
and all that? Well, I can't imagine what that would have been like coming back the next day after this is everywhere, and you've got to still check in and see these folks at the
Yeah,
jail.
well, the story broke so Valerie lifted the embargo the moment she got on a plane, and I had no idea. I started getting an inkling that something was going on because they came into my cell looking for a cell phone. I was like, "You guys strip searched me on the way in. I don't know where you think that cell phone would have been." But yeah, they started rummaging through all my stuff, and they started, they, as opposed to calling prisoner Watson, they started coming up with these other, backhanded prisoner, diva, and all these other names. And I something's going on in the outside world, and I didn't realize what it was. It wasn't until I was walking down the steps of the Supreme Court House when I got out, when my mom looked at me and she said, "Son, this is blown up. You've got a responsibility in front of you." And
Yeah.
so,
Well, it's an amazing story, and I think we can't wrap up this podcast without knowing how you got how'd you get off the island?
yeah,
Most people want to stay on the island. You want to get off the island.
yeah, absolutely. So we had accumulated enough economic pressure on the island, and then it was also there was enough of an outcry here in the United States that we had a number of political officials that started to join the fight for us, led mostly in part by Senator Mark Wayne Mullen. He's actually written the foreword for the book, but he and I spoke daily. And on May 19th, he had formed a congressional delegation task force to fly to the island. And they flew to the island on May 19th and forced to sit in with the government on May 20th. When they had that sit in, their Premier Missick, their president, was pounding his chest quite a bit, and he told Mullen that he was going to sue the United States. And Mullen started laughing. He said, "What are you going to sue us for?" And he's like, "For manufacturing the firearms and ammunition that ended up in my country." And so Mullen pulls out a report and he says, "I'll show you exactly where it's coming from. It's these two Haitian gangs right here." And he said, "The reason we have this information is because our Coast Guard patrols your waters as a favor to the United Kingdom. Sue us and it goes away tomorrow." Like, and the UK, luckily for that congressional delegation task force, had flown in their Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he took notice once Mullen had made that threat. So the Codell meeting didn't go very well. In fact, afterwards, Mullen called me and he said, "Buddy, I got to figure out a plan B." He said, "Because they're hell bent on putting you in prison for 12 years. And he's like, they're trying to make a political stance here." And, within 24 hours, the UK had reached out to Mullen and said, "Hey, hold up right there." So we're going to get involved now, because for the longest time, the UK had kept throwing their hands up. And they say, "We gave the control back to them in 2013. They control themselves now. And so we're not getting involved." Well, they finally decided to get involved. And then that, plus the economic pressure that the media was having, on June 19th, 5 minutes before my hearing, I'm walking into the courthouse, and my attorney pulls me aside and he pulls out his phone and said, "Hey, buddy, I want you to see what you just did." And it was a notice that they had just repealed the law that morning, 5 minutes before my hearing. So it no longer mandated the judge to sentence me to a 12-year minimum mandatory prison sentence. So, yeah, June 19th was a big day. And then 2 days later, I was given a suspended sentence and allowed to fly home.
Wow. Looking back on it, I mean, your perspective has to be, well, I don't even know. I'm not even sure I can articulate what it is, or, even assume that I know what it is. But I'm just thinking, how do you look at Turks and Caicos now? If you hear friends are going there or someone is going there, what goes through your mind?
I stop them and I say, "Hey, look, I get that I have a biased opinion here.
Yeah.
But I really want you to do some research, and not just what you're seeing on Instagram, right? Like, last year, Turks and Caicos had the highest per capita murder rate in all of the Caribbean. You can read about the Missick family and the corruption. In 2009, the UK disbanded that government completely because it was so corrupt. We're not talking about that long ago, right? And the guy who was running it at the time, oh, by the way, his older brother is now running the country. And so, long history. And Michael Missick, the younger brother, who had fled to Brazil and was extradited back 16 years later, has still not been sentenced for his crimes that he had committed. So yeah, man, it is a very corrupt place. Look, you can count fish from the shores, right? Like, it is some of the clearest water you'll ever see. But there's some other clear water in the world, and I would just encourage greatly, anybody that ever considers that, or any destination for that matter, is start to peel back the layers. Don't just look for, what might be your favorite restaurant.
Mhm.
You need to look and see if there are other things, boiling underneath the surface, in some of these destinations, because it was nothing that I had ever given any thought to.
Well, last question for you. How on earth do you come back to medical sales after that? More confident? Detached? I mean, does it affect how you handle rejection or pressure or quotas
Oh
or,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, I had to come back pretty quickly. So I was a little bit of all of that, right? So I was well out of vacation days whenever I got home. So I get home on a Friday and I went back to work on Monday, and so yes, I was detached, and we were still doing a number of interviews, and we still had camera crews in our house, and so life was chaotic. So I can't say that 100% of me was showing up for those first few days, but but yes, it undoubtedly changed. If I see a wall in front of me now, it is no longer
Hmm.
grief about the wall, the size of the wall, the breadth of the wall. It's okay. Let's assess the situation. What do we got to do to get through it, under it, over it, or around it, right? Like, and so I kind of have redefined my idea of what's possible, what I'm capable of. Never in a million years did I think that I'd be sitting here saying that I helped influence a country to change their law, after 70 days. And yet we did. And I'm home, and thanks be to God, I mean, it was his design. It was him working ahead of us. But I think that takes place in all of our secular lives, in all of our secular careers is he's going before us. And so, yeah, my mantra now is see where he's working in my life, and I'm going to meet him there, and I'm going to put all the trust in that. So,
Love it. That's a great final word for all of us. The name of the book and when is it coming
Turk,
out?
Turks and Chaos.
Turks and Caicos.
So it should be available in March. Senator Mullen, his office just got back to me today, and it's going through the Senate Ethics Committee right now for his contribution to the book. And so once we have that, it's kind of ready to go. We got to get it published through Amazon,
Mhm.
and so yeah, I'm self-publishing the book. I wanted the ability to tell the entire story, and um, from all components, right? The faith component as well as, I mean, it feels like a true crime because I was
It does.
living a true crime documentary. And so, um, you know, it hopefully will be available. I'm hoping the beginning of March.
Great. Just in time for me when I'm going to the Bahamas with my family. Read it there.
Yes, yes.
Hear
In fact,
myself.
I've got a couple people you can deliver some copies to there in Bahamas. So I think as you read further along in the book, you might understand who that is.
Got it. Got it. Good stuff. Well, thank you for being on, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having me, Jordan.